What is up, Gamer Army? Welcome back to another episode of Psycho Gamer. I am your host, Aubrey, and today we are going to be talking about racing games that Arcade1up could possibly release if we cross our fingers hard enough and beg them. Now, we know that Arcade1up does look at the forums, they look at the actual Facebook groups, at least the big ones that John D's a part of, and they do see people asking and requesting some particular cabinets. Now, it turns into a licensing issue in most cases, but many of these companies, they already have direct licensing with. So what titles are we going to be talking about? Well, you're going to have to stay tuned, but you need to hit that like and subscribe first, guys, because we're going to talk about some arcade racers right after this. Stay tuned. All right. Welcome back. Like I said, today we are going to talk about some racing games that have been released in the arcades over the years. Now, many of them are from the 1990s, maybe 80s. There's a couple probably from the 2000s that we're going to talk about in here. But many of them are near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. Even to this day, you can still find many of these cabinets in specific arcades, like going into Dave & Buster's. Or sometimes you can even go into little pizza parlors and still find a couple of arcade cabinets in some of those particular locations. So first ones we're going to talk about, Sega Rally Championship. Now, Sega Rally Championship, you can still go into places like Dave & Buster's and local arcades that still have these particular cabinets. Now, the only downside for these particular cabinets is the amount of space that they really need. Now, many people are, doing 4 cabinets or connecting the racers. Now, this was released in 1994, but it is still a beautiful game and is still relevant. And the fact that they've got a few rally titles that they have out there that they could release on one cabinet, they won't really have to go look for multiple licenses from multiple different companies. They just need to go to Sega and try to actually get the license to release these particular titles. So technically there's 5 rally games, but there were 3 of them that were released in the arcade. You have Sega Rally Championship, Sega Rally 2, and I think it's just called Sega Rally. And then you have Sega Rally 3. So you got a few different titles for this particular company. Now, next game you got would probably be a little harder to get because they would only really be able to put 1 or 2 titles on this. You got the motorcycle racing game, Hang On. Now, I did play that when I was a kid. I actually played it when they actually had the motorcycles that you could actually kind of sit on. They had a few variations of this. You had a stand-up version of it. You also had one that you sit down on a big red motorcycle, and then you had one that was kind of on like the half part of an actual motorcycle then in that case, and it actually moved back and forth as you were able to turn. That was basically how you turned. Now, the one that actually is just the cabinet itself, it has a steering wheel very similar to what you would see with the likes of Paperboy. I mean, heck, that could be another title they could actually add on to a cabinet such as this as well. So, what do you guys think? Do you think Hang On could be a release that they could do? I mean, it's one of those titles that it was a give and take. So, it's either you liked it or you didn't like it. If you had no balance, well, the game made you have balance, whether you liked it or not. Next title on the list that I am doing, Crazy Taxi. Everybody loved Crazy Taxi. Everybody went crazy. Now, Crazy Taxi was released in 1999 on the arcade cabinets first before it was released on the Sega Dreamcast. And it actually exploded on the Sega Dreamcast and was one of the top titles for that particular cabinet, because it was just fun. It was just wacky fun. And the soundtrack from The Offspring, I mean, they really couldn't have picked a better band and a better song to actually release for this cabinet. Now, they had Crazy Taxi 1, 2, and 3. They had a variation called High Rollers. So the only downside is I think the first and third games are the only ones that actually made it into arcades. So Crazy Taxi 2 was pretty much console only. However, the rate Arcade1up has been releasing titles and even some console variations. We're looking at you over there on Marvel vs. Capcom cabinets. there's a possibility they could release all three of these titles in one good arcade cabinet. Now, obviously, we wouldn't expect them to have a big giant sit-down one there like it's the back half of an actual taxi, which I believe they actually had a version that was like that. But, at least having maybe a stand-up variation or just a basic sit-down variation would be really cool. You know that all of you modders out there would be looking to do something to better this particular cabinet. So I think it would be a good sale for Arcade1up. What do you guys think? Did you love Crazy Taxi? I know you can still go into movie theaters. Movie theaters actually still have Crazy Taxi in there just because of how fun it really is still. Next series of games that I think they could release, the Cruisin games. Cruisin USA, Cruisin World, Cruisin Exotica. You got 3 titles right there, right off the bat that they could release, and they've all been out for a bit of time. Now, there was somebody online named Noah Stiles that actually released his own concept variation of Cruisin Exotica, or something that Arcade1up could do. Now, it is possible, because it doesn't look like it's a really crazy title that you'd really be looking to go with. I know just realistically having the shifter would be probably the biggest obstacle that Arcade1up would have to actually overcome. That would probably be the most expensive part and the easiest part of the actual cabinet to get broken. So while I would love to see this, I would like to see them definitely work on something like the shifter, because that's going to have more stress on it than the Tron flight stick had. And we know how many people had those flight sticks actually break on them because the screw wasn't far enough into the actual stick itself. So it's a possibility. I think that because this game has been out for so long, or all 3 of these titles have been out for so long, it's possible, because you can still find Cruisin Exotica and Cruisin World in some arcades as well. I know we have a local arcade that still actually has this particular title. Now, one that is a little bit older that a lot of people do tend to see around occasionally is Off-Road Challenge. Now, it is, I think, the only title on here that we have that is a truck racing game next to the Iron Man Off-Road that you kind of see. This is actually by Midway also, so there's a good possibility that with a cabinet such as the Cruisin USA, Cruisin World, Cruisin Exotica, they could actually release this particular title on a cabinet with these 3 particular games. So I think this would be a good option, whether it's a standalone by itself, whether it's on with this particular, with Cruisin USA, or maybe do a couple of the titles at each cabinet and give them their own titles. So now the next one is Iron Man Off-Road. That was that really interesting little truck racing game that I know we're not going to see, because it's the only game out there that really had 3 steering wheels for 3 racers. I've seen this in pizza parlors as well, where people can still go play this. Little kids love it. I mean, you got that steering wheel, just basically just spin it, and it just goes and goes and goes and doesn't stop. So those were really good. I think it would be a little harder for them to really replicate this particular one. While I would love to see this, I don't think it'll happen, because it's literally one title. Now, that's not to say that Arcade1up hasn't released single title cabinets such as, Terminator 2. But I think while this one would be amazing to see, it's not going to happen. So what do you guys think? Do you think this would be a title that you would love to see? Post it down below. If not, post something that you would like to see that's not on my list. And we're not through yet. We still have a few titles to go, and I think a couple of them, or at least one of them, I think you're going to know what I'm going to talk about. Daytona USA. Oh, yes. Daytona. Yes, Daytona USA has been out for a very, very long time, but even with its pixeled goodness from back in the 90s, it was still a great title. While, yes, it was released on consoles as well, such as the Sega Saturn. I think it was even released on the PlayStation as well. Arcade is really where people fell in love with this particular cabinet as well. So if you go to local Dave & Buster's, you can actually still find some of these particular games there. Now, they did have Daytona USA They had Daytona USA 2, and they had Daytona Championship USA 3. All three were released in the arcade. So there is a possibility that they could release these. Obviously, Daytona Championship USA 3 is a little bit newer title, but I think when you start looking at some of the current games that they're releasing, such as NFL Blitz and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I think we're starting to see that this hardware that Arcade1up is actually using is able to run many of these more current games. Maybe not today's games, but probably up into the early 2000s is where they could probably get comfortably. So next title is basically going to be special credit. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Now, I know, don't groan, I know Episode 1 was not everybody's favorite Star Wars title. And a lot of people feel this was the beginning of an episodic problem that LucasArts, or Lucas in general, George Lucas, was having when it came to this series. However, Episode 1 Racer was a fun game. It was a very fun game. Now, if you went to some arcades that actually had this title, I don't know if you can find too many, they actually had versions where you could actually sit in a pod racer and you can actually play the game like this. So I know I actually went to one in California when I lived out there, and there actually was one of these at a Dave & Buster's. Now, I couldn't tell you. But if it is out there still, I'm sure there's people still playing it. Now, if you played Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer on the 64, you know that that's pretty much where they had the game. Now, Episode 1 itself, obviously, the games, they had those over on the PlayStation. They weren't the hottest titles, but they were still pretty good. I think they followed the story of the movies really, really good. Now, the last title, I know I'm talking a lot. Last title I have on here is a just for the heck of it title. This one in no way is going to come out anytime soon, if ever at all. NASCAR Arcade. How could we have racing games without mentioning NASCAR? Obviously, NASCAR Arcade has been out for a little while. It is a more current game. Now, you're looking at it being released back in 2012. So the graphics are going to be a bit newer. And the reason why I say this isn't going to be released is because this particular game was released with a couple variations with a 32-inch plasma screen and a 42-inch plasma screen. We're just now seeing Arcade1up getting to 19 inches, let alone going bigger than that. Now, this would be something you're probably going to have to basically make on your own. Now, many of these titles that I've mentioned also, up to and including this particular title, could have online play or possibly have the ability to do cabinet linking. Now, that's something we really haven't seen Arcade1up really do yet when it comes to any of these particular cabinets, short of only online play. But when you start looking at things like Daytona USA, Sega Rally Championship, all of those games have had the ability to have multiple arcade machines linked together, so you can play, 4 players or 8 players. Now, I could also mention things like Mario Kart that they had in the arcades as well, but they really haven't gotten any licensing from Nintendo for anything. So if that ever happens, I will be very, very surprised. But that's going to do it for this particular episode, guys. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with my assessments on these particular titles? I think that the racing games have been extremely overlooked when it comes to Arcade1up, short of doing Ridge Racer and Outrun. There's not really many titles that they've actually really released that racing game fans can be excited about. So if these games are not on your list of titles you want to see, post down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. But also, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe, guys. I haven't hit that 1,000 subscribers yet. I haven't hit that 4,000 hours yet. To get monetized, I've still got a long ways to go. But I'm still doing the titles, and I'm doing these videos specifically for you guys because I want to get some information and some new content out there for you guys that maybe you didn't really think of. So I appreciate you guys coming out each and every time. Again, I do it for you. So until next time, guys, game on.